In this video, I'm going to explain single responsibility class. What does that mean? The first letter of solid single responsibility class. To demonstrate this, I'm going to be using Java, and let's get started. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to be going to go to the desktop, and I created a folder called single responsibility. Let's create a few classes. I'm gonna create a main class .java, and this is gonna be my client class. This is the client, and I'm gonna also be creating an interface called output interface. Output interface.java, and let's go into it. In this output interface, create a public class. Public interface, and this public interface is called output interface. This output interface will have the contract, we call the contract, and this contract will be public, of course, void output method, just a function header, the contract that we're going to adhere to. Okay, and then going back, we created the output interface. Now we're gonna create some classes that implements the output interface. So I'm gonna create some HTML output class, and this is gonna be the Java. And this class will implement the output interface. So I'm gonna create a public class HTML output that implements the output interface. And of course, when you implement the output interface, you have to adhere to the contract. So you're gonna have to do the public void output method, and in this you're gonna write your logic to the HTML output. So you can write logic here to output HTML. So we can just simply say, for example, to make it simple, system.out.println, and here you can just say, for example, HTML output, and basically you just create a class that implements the interface. And here you created another class. Let's, for example, create another class called, for example, JSON output.java, and this class will implement again public class JSON output will it's gonna implement the output interface again, public void output method, and in this method we're gonna output JSON format. So we're gonna just say system.out.println, and in this I'm gonna say JSON output. Alright, so let's go to the main, the client, and the client of course will have public class main, public static void main function string arguments args. And in this example, what we're going to do, we're going to declare an output interface. See how simple is that? And we say, for example, we want, let's say, an HTML output, so we just say HTML output is equal new HTML output. And doing so, we can now just say HTML output dot output, and if we run this, let's go to C desktop, single responsibility Java C main, so there is no errors main. Sorry, we notice that the output is HTML output because we delegated the task for HTML output class. Now we can create an output interface, output interface with, for example, JSON output as an object, and then instantiate the JSON output class. And here we can say JSON output dot output, and here we're gonna have different output method. Again, run. We notice that we have an HTML output, a JSON output, and all of them are of type output interface because the HTML class implements the output interface. The JSON also, JSON output class implements the output interface. So we just need to declare the name of the interface and then the method that we want to output our format of our string, whether it is HTML or JSON. Now, let's say, for example, you have a new output format. Let's say, for example, we're gonna do an XML output format. You don't really have to modify any of these classes, neither the JSON, neither the HTML class, so you don't have to do that. All what you need to do is just go and create a class with a single responsibility and call that class, for example, XML output. So let's do it, for example. So I'm gonna create another class called XML output, and this is gonna be the Java. This class will also implement the output interface. So this is gonna be a class called XML output, and this is gonna be implements the output interface. And here we have public void output, for example, and we're gonna say, for example, output XML format. So here we just say system.out print line, and I'm gonna say XML format or output, for example. Now simply go to the client and let the client choose which format he want to output. So he can just say, for example, I wanna, for example, say wanna output interface, and then he just say, for example, XML, and then he just say a new XML output, and then here XML.output. We'll notice that this will bring an output of type of XML. So I'm gonna compile the class again, clear the screen, and then run. We notice that we have HTML output, JSON output, XML, and it depends on the user whether he wants an HTML or JSON output or XML. He can choose for himself what type of output he needs. We didn't really have to modify any of these classes, just created another class that implement the output interface, and then it just works. Now another thing, let's assume that the client, which is the main class here, contacting a middle layer to do some stuff. For example, let's create another class called middle. So I'm gonna call this class middle layer, for example, of some sort that do something, and this is gonna be a class. So I'm gonna create here public class middle, and in this class is gonna have a constructor called public middle. Okay, now in the for example, we don't want this. For example, in the client, in the main class, we're gonna instantiate middle, so we're gonna say middle, gonna call an object, and I'm gonna send new middle, and I'm gonna send here a new interface. For example, I'm going to output this something or whatever the client wants the request. For example, is requesting his output to be in a format, for example, let's say a new, for example, JSON output. And in this method, I can go to the middle class and here have an output interface, an object here, formatter, for example, formatter, and here I just say output interface. I'm gonna receive an output interface of type formatter, for example, and here I'm just gonna say formatter. This to formatter equal formatter, the past one, the new output, or for example here the output type of the output or the formatter doesn't really matter. Just say for example out, and now you have this middle class that have the formatter output interface. Now let's say you have a method here called void that does some stuff, for example format, and this method will just say formatter, and let's just close this. Format, gonna call output method on it. So here in the main function we just instantiated a new object, and in this object we can just say object.format, and here in the middle layer format is gonna call the output formatter, just like this. So I can go here and compile my code, run java main formatter.output object.format, let's say java c main, java main. We notice here that it outputted JSON.output, sending through the middle function, the middle class, and this middle class has an output interface formatter. You just send the type of format you want to format your output in, and you can do it. You can also just do it in the here, for example, just say formatter or this dot formatter dot output, and it can just simply do the same thing here. You don't have to call this, simply once, and we notice that now if the user, for example, wants to change, he wants his format in a different, so the client will just need to choose which format he want to output, XML for. So now, for example, if the user want to choose or want to change his output to, for example, XML or anything else, for example, HTML output, so he just send in the class that he wants to do, and then here when you compile, here you have an HTML output. If you want an XML output, so you can just send an XML output, then an XML output. If he just want JSON output, then he can just call JSON, and here it is, JSON output. So I think that's what we call a single responsibility class, the first letter of solid, and here we don't have to modify any of these classes. For example, if we want to output a new format, we just need to create a new class that implements our output interface. So the output interface will have the contracts again. Here the output interface will only have the contract, that all the classes that implements this interface can adhere to this contract, which is output. And so I created a few classes, for example HTML, that implements the output interface. Notice here the HTML output class will implement the output interface and will adhere to the contract, which is output. And here we're gonna have the logic for outputting an HTML format. And XML is again another class that implements the output interface. Again, it adheres to the contract output and it output XML format. JSON, another class that implements output interface and is gonna adhere to the output contract. Also, is gonna output JSON.output. Now here we have in the client will only choose which format he wants to output in, and then he does it all. So here you notice that, for example, if there is a new method or a new way of outputting, you don't really have to modify any of these classes. You just need to create another class that implements the output interface, and all of that logic stays the same. You're gonna have for example, output interface will still be the same. You just need to create a new class, and that new class implement the output interface will be injected here, and then you can do that outputting simply by doing this method. And this is what we call single responsibility class. Thank you very much, and see you again.